She told me not to call her Auntie. So I asked, "What should I call you tonight?" It began with a glance I never meant to linger on. My friend's mom, someone I'd known only in the background of childhood memories and casual greetings, suddenly felt different. She was standing near the kitchen counter, sunlight slanting through the window and catching the highlights in her hair, making it look like it had been touched by gold. There was a quiet grace to her posture, the way she shifted her weight from one foot to the other with calm, effortless elegance, like she had all the time in the world. I tried to look away, to focus on the cereal box I was holding, but something in the way her eyes lifted to mine, a flash of curiosity, a faintly teasing spark, pulled me back. It wasn't that she had changed, it was that I was noticing her differently now. She wasn't just a friend's mom, a background figure. She was someone alive with subtle power, warmth, and unspoken stories. Her perfume reached me first, a soft, floral scent that lingered delicately in the air, mingling with the morning light. It wasn't overwhelming, it was comforting, like a blanket draped over a cool morning. She moved with quiet confidence, her fingers brushing against the edge of the counter, her nails catching the sunlight for a brief, gleaming second. I noticed the little things, the crease of her smile when she laughed at some half-forgotten joke my friend had told her, the way her eyes crinkled just so, and the small tilt of her head that seemed both inviting and guarded. I felt a strange sort of nervousness stir in my chest. It wasn't fear, exactly, but a tension I couldn't place. My heartbeat was louder than it should have been, and I realized I was imagining how it would feel if she spoke to me directly, not in passing. If she looked at me the way she was looking at me now, with that quiet, knowing curiosity. I reminded myself that she was my friend's mom, and yet the usual labels didn't seem to hold. There was something electric in the air, subtle yet undeniable. A connection that didn't need words yet tugged insistently at my attention. She shifted slightly, catching me staring, and instead of scolding or looking uncomfortable, she just smiled, a smile that seemed to acknowledge the unspoken awareness between us. That small, simple gesture sent a shiver through me, a hint of something uncharted and dangerous, yet profoundly magnetic. And in that instant, I understood that this wasn't just a fleeting thought or a passing curiosity. Something had begun, soft, slow, and quietly insistent, a spark that promised to grow, if we allowed it to. A few days later, I found myself in the kitchen again, this time by accident, or maybe by fate. I had come over under the pretense of dropping off a book for my friend, but as soon as I stepped inside, I saw her there, leaning casually against the counter, her fingers wrapped loosely around a mug of coffee. The aroma of freshly brewed beans mingled with the subtle sweetness of her perfume, creating a scent I couldn't stop noticing. She glanced up, her eyes meeting mine, and for a moment, the room felt smaller, quieter, as if the air itself had condensed around us. "You're here earlier than usual," she said, her voice calm but warm, carrying the kind of gentle curiosity that made it hard to look away. I shuffled my feet awkwardly, fumbling with the book. "Yeah, thought I'd drop this off before it got too late." My voice sounded different to me in her presence, softer somehow, more aware of its tone. She smiled, tilting her head slightly. "You always seem thoughtful," she said, as if she were observing more than just the words I spoke. There was no judgment in it, only genuine interest, and that simple acknowledgement sent a warmth through my chest I wasn't ready to name. We started talking casually, about the book, about minor things in life, but even mundane topics felt charged with subtle energy. Her laughter was quiet but infectious, a soft vibration that seemed to fill the small kitchen. I noticed the slight brush of her hand against mine when she handed me a pen to sign something, the warmth lingering longer than it had any right to. I realized I was staring at the lines of her hands, at the way her fingers moved, and that small detail somehow made the moment feel profoundly intimate. She asked me about my day, about my plans, and there was a patience in her questions that made me want to answer honestly, to reveal more than I usually would. It wasn't just kindness, it was attentiveness, a way of listening that made me feel seen. And I noticed myself leaning slightly closer, not consciously, just drawn toward her presence, toward the quiet magnetism she exuded. The conversation ended almost abruptly, my friend's voice calling from another room, but the space between us lingered. She gave me a small, lingering smile, her eyes warm and knowing, as if aware of the thoughts I hadn't dared to speak aloud. I left the house that day with a strange mix of exhilaration and hesitation, my mind replaying every word, every glance, every subtle gesture. It was the first time I realized that what I felt wasn't just curiosity. There was a connection forming, quiet, deliberate, impossible to ignore, and it made the familiar feel entirely new. A few evenings later, I found myself helping her carry groceries from the car. It was a small favor, something I had done 100 times for friends and family, yet today it felt different. Maybe it was the way she moved, confident, effortless, yet gentle, her presence radiating a quiet warmth I could almost feel in the air around me. As I handed her a bag, a small accident happened, a paper bag ripped slightly, and a few items tumbled toward the ground. Without thinking, my hand shot out to steady the bag. Her hand brushed mine in the process, a brief, fleeting touch, but it sent a ripple through me that I couldn't ignore. There was warmth there, a subtle pressure, a grounding sensation that lingered longer than it should have. I could feel the fine lines of her fingers against mine, the soft, unspoken steadiness in the way she held my hand for just a heartbeat longer than necessary. She looked up at me then, and our eyes met. There was a flicker of something in her gaze, recognition, amusement, maybe even surprise. Her lips curved into a small, knowing smile, the kind that made the world shrink to the space between us. I realized I was holding my breath, not from panic, but from the quiet intensity of that shared moment. Later, inside the house, the air still hummed with the memory of that touch. I noticed how she moved around the kitchen, how her fingers grazed the edge of the counter, how the soft swish of her clothes carried a rhythm I couldn't stop noticing. My attention lingered on her gestures, the small, graceful movements that revealed so much about her, her composure, her confidence, and a vulnerability she rarely let anyone see. When she asked me to help with something small, adjusting a picture frame, reaching for a high shelf, I caught the scent of her perfume again, faint but intoxicating, lingering in the warm kitchen air. Our hands touched again, fleetingly, and I felt that same quiet electricity. It wasn't loud, it wasn't urgent, it was patient, subtle, and deeply magnetic. In that moment, I understood that intimacy didn't need words. It didn't need declarations. A brush of hands, a fleeting touch, a shared glance, it was enough to make the heart race, to make the mind notice things it had been ignoring. And in the hush of that evening, as we stood close, both pretending to focus on tasks, I realized something undeniable: this was no ordinary friendship. Something unspoken, delicate, and profound had begun. The spark that started with a glance was now alive in touch, and I knew that neither of us would be able to ignore it for long. In the days following that brief, electric touch, my mind refused to settle. Every time I thought of her, it wasn't as my friend's mom anymore, it was as a woman I wanted to notice, to understand, to be near. I felt an internal tug-of-war I hadn't anticipated. Part of me recoiled at the idea, reminded constantly of the social boundaries, the unspoken rules I was bending simply by thinking about her this way. Yet another part of me, the part that had felt the warmth of her hand against mine, the gentle pressure, the fleeting intimacy, throbbed with quiet insistence that this connection was real. I caught myself replaying moments in my mind. The way she had brushed her hair behind her ear in the morning light. The subtle crinkle at the corners of her eyes when she smiled. The soft lilt of her voice when she had asked about my day. Each detail, trivial in isolation, became a thread I followed obsessively, weaving an internal narrative that was both thrilling and dangerous. The tension wasn't just emotional, it was physical, too. I noticed the quickening of my heartbeat when she entered a room, the unexpected warmth in my chest at the sound of her laughter, even the faint scent of her perfume lingering long after she had passed. It was intoxicating, confusing, and impossible to ignore. Yet, every time I allowed myself to imagine more, to let my thoughts wander toward what could happen between us, a sense of hesitation pulled me back. She was older, more experienced, and far wiser than I. How could someone like her possibly see me the way I was beginning to see her? And what would my friend think if they knew? These questions haunted me, not with fear, but with a quiet awareness of the stakes. At the same time, I sensed her awareness of something unspoken between us. The small glances, the lingering moments of attention, the soft, teasing ways she interacted with me, it all suggested she noticed too. That awareness both thrilled and terrified me. It was like standing at the edge of a cliff, exhilarating to look over, terrifying to jump. I realized that the spark between us had grown beyond mere curiosity. It had become a presence in my life, subtle but impossible to ignore, weaving its way into my thoughts, coloring even the most mundane moments. And yet, I felt bound by restraint, by propriety, by the social norms that demanded silence. I knew one thing with certainty: ignoring it entirely was no longer an option. This wasn't a fleeting crush. It was something deeper, quietly insistent, and it demanded recognition. The question was whether I had the courage to confront it, or if I would continue to live with the tension quietly pulsing between us. The evening began innocuously enough. I was over at the house ostensibly to help my friend with a school project, but as usual, she was there, calm, composed, and entirely magnetic. She had that effortless way of moving through the kitchen, tying her apron over a dress that hinted at elegance without trying too hard, and somehow, it made my chest tighten in the gentlest, most unexpected way. We started talking while she prepared a snack. Our conversation began lightly, teasing each other about small things, the music she was playing, my lack of culinary skills, the way her cat seemed to ignore me at every turn. There was laughter, soft and genuine, filling the warm kitchen, and I noticed the way her eyes lit up when she smiled, how the light caught the golden strands of her hair, and the subtle tilt of her head that seemed almost intimate. Then came the moment, a simple, playful exchange that would shift everything. I had called her Auntie once again, out of habit, and she stopped mid-motion, raising an eyebrow with a half-smile. "Don't call me Auntie," she said, her tone teasing but firm, the faintest quiver of something deeper hiding beneath the words. I paused, my mind racing for an appropriate, clever reply. And then, without thinking too hard, I said it, "Then tell me what to call you tonight." Her laugh caught me off guard, a soft, melodic sound that vibrated through the room and, unbidden, sent a shiver down my spine. She leaned slightly closer, just enough for our shoulders to brush. I felt a warmth there, a subtle electricity that was both thrilling and terrifying. Her eyes met mine, steady and knowing, and for a moment, the kitchen seemed to vanish around us, leaving only the two of us in a suspended, intimate bubble. The tension between us was quiet but undeniable. It wasn't about words alone, it was in the lingering glance, the brush of her hair from her shoulder as she leaned to reach for something, the way her hand briefly touched mine on the counter. Every small gesture became amplified, a language of its own, speaking of curiosity, longing, and the unspoken promise of something more. Yet beneath the playfulness, there was a restraint that neither of us breached. We were dancing on the edge of propriety, aware of boundaries but drawn irresistibly closer by a connection that defied explanation. I felt my pulse quicken, my chest warm, and my thoughts scatter, yet the moment remained safe, teasing, and intensely alive. That night, I left with a mind swirling with possibilities. The playful banter had shifted something fundamental between us, it was no longer just glances or fleeting touches. It was recognition, acknowledgement, a first confession in jest but loaded with meaning. And for the first time, I realized, we both knew the spark existed, and neither of us could pretend it wasn't there anymore. The day was quiet, almost unbearably so, yet somehow comforting. We had retreated to the living room, a soft late afternoon light spilling through the windows and casting gentle patterns on the floor. She had invited me to sit with her while she organized a few papers, and what began as casual conversation slowly drifted into something deeper, something neither of us had planned but both of us needed. Her voice was soft, carrying the subtle warmth of someone who had lived, who had felt deeply and seen much. She shared little pieces of herself, not the polished, composed version I saw in public, but fragments of her thoughts, moments of doubt, small regrets, and memories that made her laugh or sigh quietly. I found myself leaning forward instinctively, drawn by the authenticity in her words, the vulnerability she allowed to float between us. I responded in kind, cautiously at first, revealing small truths I hadn't shared with anyone else. The stories were trivial on the surface, but in the sharing, they became intimate. She listened, not just with her ears, but with her presence, with the steady gaze that seemed to say, "I see you. I understand you." That alone made my chest tighten, warmth spreading through me in a way I had not anticipated. At one point, our hands brushed as she reached for a paper. This time, neither of us withdrew. Instead, she let her hand rest lightly on mine, just long enough for the pulse in her fingers to brush against mine, creating a quiet, electric rhythm. I felt her warmth, the softness of her skin, the unspoken comfort in the gesture. Our eyes met, and there was a fleeting silence, a shared acknowledgement that words could not capture. The air between us seemed charged with something tender and unspoken. I noticed the subtle rise and fall of her chest, the delicate shift of her weight as she leaned closer to examine a document, and the small, fleeting smiles that curved her lips when our eyes met. Every movement was deliberate yet gentle, a language of care and closeness that spoke louder than words ever could. By the time I stood to leave, I felt different, lighter, warmer, but also profoundly aware of the unspoken bond that had formed. The playful tension from before had deepened into something more substantial, trust, connection, and an understanding that what we shared could not be undone. As I walked out into the fading light of evening, I realized that our bond had moved beyond glances and fleeting touches. It had become a quiet, steadfast intimacy, one built on shared vulnerability, trust, and the gentle acknowledgement of feelings neither of us had dared to name aloud. And in that awareness, I knew that everything was about to change, in ways neither of us could yet fully understand. The evening had settled into a soft, amber glow, the kind of light that makes everything feel intimate and timeless. I found myself in the living room again, not by design but by habit, drawn to her presence like a subtle, irresistible current. She was sitting on the couch, a book open on her lap, yet her attention seemed only partly on the pages. Her eyes lifted as I entered, and in that look, I felt the quiet acknowledgement of everything we had been building between us. We spoke softly, words gentle and deliberate, each sentence carrying more weight than it seemed. The room was calm, only the faint rustle of pages, the hum of the evening outside, and the occasional creak of the floorboards under our movement. I realized, in that stillness, how profoundly I had come to crave these quiet, shared spaces. As I reached to place a cup of tea on the coffee table, our hands brushed again. This time, neither of us pulled away. Her palm was warm, steady, reassuring, and I felt an electric thrill run up my arm. She didn't speak, didn't need to. Her presence, the way she subtly leaned closer, the slight incline of her head, conveyed a depth of understanding that words could never capture. We lingered there, sitting close enough for our shoulders to occasionally touch, a small, comforting contact that somehow said everything and nothing all at once. Every glance carried intention, every movement was deliberate yet effortless. I noticed the gentle rise and fall of her breath, the soft sway of her hair as she tucked a strand behind her ear, and the warmth of her eyes holding mine a beat longer than necessary. For the first time, I felt a quiet certainty. This was more than curiosity or fleeting attraction, it was a connection built on trust, subtle desire, and shared vulnerability. We had navigated the playful teasing, the stolen touches, the electric glances, and now we existed in a space of mutual understanding, unspoken but undeniable. She finally broke the silence, her voice a soft murmur, "You know, this feels right." And in that moment, I didn't question it, didn't hesitate. There was no need for dramatic declarations or impulsive gestures. The warmth of the evening, the closeness of our bodies, and the steady cadence of our hearts said it all. As I stood to leave, she rested a light hand on my arm, a silent promise that this was only the beginning. The world outside might demand caution, and the age gap might complicate things, but for now, the quiet intimacy between us was enough. The spark that had begun with a glance, a touch, and playful banter had grown into something tender, profound, and enduring, a connection affirmed not with words, but with presence, attention, and the subtle poetry of closeness. And in that soft evening light, I realized that slow-burning desire, when nurtured with respect, trust, and patience, could become something truly unforgettable. If you felt the tension, the warmth, and the quiet moments between them, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe for more slow-burn romances that linger in your heart. And comment below, what would you do if you were in his shoes?